Max, a German shepherd with a glossy brown coat that once gleamed in the sunlight, now lay on the cold, sterile floor of the veterinary clinic. His eyes, once full of life and energy, were dull and lifeless. His body, once strong and muscular, was now thin, fragile, and barely able to move. The illness had drained him completely, and the vet's diagnosis had left the Anderson family heartbroken. It was a terminal condition, and there was no treatment that could cure him. The family sat in the waiting room, silence hanging heavily in the air. Mr. Anderson, his face drawn with sorrow, gazed at the floor, lost in thought. He had raised Max since the dog was a pup. They had been through everything together: birthdays, graduations, holidays. Max had been more than just a pet. He was family. To make the decision to end Max's life felt like a betrayal, but the vet had given them no other choice. His quality of life was gone, and euthanasia was the only way to end his suffering. Mrs. Anderson sat beside her husband, her hand resting on his, though neither of them had spoken in what felt like hours. Tears silently ran down her face as she glanced over at the door to the back room where Max lay. It was hard to even think about it, hard to imagine life without the dog who had been there through thick and thin. She could still hear his bark echoing through the house, could still feel the weight of his body leaning against her during the long, lonely nights. The thought of losing him was unbearable. Then there was Lily, the youngest of the Anderson children. At just 7 years old, she didn't completely understand what was happening, but she knew that Max wasn't well. She had watched him slowly become weaker and more withdrawn over the past few weeks, and now the vet had confirmed what everyone had feared. Max was dying. Lily, with her big brown eyes full of innocence, couldn't comprehend why things had to end this way. She had grown up with Max. He was her companion, her protector, her friend. She spent countless hours with him in the yard, playing games and sharing secrets. Max had always been there, and the idea of losing him was impossible for her to grasp. Lily stared at her parents, her little hands clutching the stuffed bunny she always carried with her. "Is Max going to be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry. Mr. Anderson couldn't bring himself to answer right away. He wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, but he knew that was a lie. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and whispered, "We just have to say goodbye, sweetheart. Max is very sick, and he's in a lot of pain." Lily's face scrunched up in confusion and sadness. She didn't understand why such a thing had to happen. She could see her parents' faces, their eyes full of sorrow, and she knew that whatever they were saying meant Max was in danger. Her heart ached as she thought about losing him, but deep down, she wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not yet. Not ever. The vet, who had been waiting for the family to make a decision, appeared at the door, his face kind but solemn. He nodded toward Mr. Anderson, signaling that it was time. The decision had been made. It was time to let go. The moment of truth had arrived, and the Anderson family stood at the precipice of an unimaginable heartbreak. Max was waiting, but so was hope. Lily wasn't ready to give up. The weight of the decision hung heavily over the Andersons as they sat together in the sterile clinic room, the cold metal chairs feeling more like an unforgiving trap. Max, once the proud protector of their home, now lay motionless on the vet's examination table, breathing shallowly. His eyes, though still loyal, lacked the vibrancy that had once sparked joy in the Anderson family's lives. Each passing minute felt like an eternity, and each second seemed to pull them further into the abyss of impending loss. Mr. Anderson looked at his wife, his face lined with grief. They both knew this was the end of the road for Max, and yet the idea of saying goodbye felt almost unnatural. They had made this decision because it was what they thought was best for their beloved dog, but the finality of it all made their hearts ache. His family had always been strong, but this moment was breaking them. Lily, sitting between her parents, clung to Max's collar as though her tiny hands could hold on to him forever. She couldn't understand why it had to be this way. She had so many questions swirling in her head, but none of them could be answered. Why did Max have to be sick? Why did dogs have to die? Why couldn't she just play with him like she always had? Her small voice broke the silence. "Can't we make him better? Don't you love him? She gazed up at her parents, eyes wide and filled with a childlike innocence that only deepened their sorrow. She couldn't fathom the gravity of the situation. To her, Max was simply her friend, and friends didn't just disappear. The quiet ache in her chest intensified, and for the first time, the Andersons saw the depth of their daughter's heartbreak. It was as if she knew, instinctively, that something was about to be taken from her, something irreplaceable. Mrs. Anderson blinked away her own tears and reached for Lily's hand, her own trembling. "We love him so much, sweetheart. We love him with all our hearts," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She could barely keep the words together as she looked at Max, who was lying still on the table, his tail barely wagging at her touch. She could feel his pulse weak under her hand, and her own heart broke for him. Max had been more than just a dog. He had been the backbone of their family's joy. He had been there through birthdays, through tears, and through every major life event. Now, as the reality of losing him settled in, the grief seemed unbearable. The thought of returning home without him, without his reassuring presence, felt impossible. For a long time, no one spoke. The room was filled with the sound of quiet sobs, the sound of love and grief coming together in a moment of inevitable loss. The vet, who had been watching the family struggle, cleared his throat softly, offering them a gentle, almost apologetic glance. "If you're ready, we can do this now. But of course, take your time." Mr. Anderson stood up, his face pale and drawn. He walked over to Max, kneeling beside the dog and placing a hand on his head. "I'm sorry, boy," he murmured, his voice breaking. Max barely moved, but he lifted his head slightly, as if to say one last goodbye. For a fleeting moment, the dog's loyalty shone through, and the Andersons held on to that precious bond. But there was still one person who couldn't let go. Not yet. Lily looked at her parents, her tear-streaked face full of confusion and heartbreak. She didn't want to say goodbye. Not like this. Not when there was still a sliver of hope left in her heart. Lily sat quietly on the edge of the examination table, her little fingers tangled in the hem of her dress, her eyes fixed on Max. She could feel the heaviness in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on her tiny shoulders. The words she had heard, the talk of euthanasia, of letting Max go, hadn't made sense to her. How could anyone say goodbye to someone they loved so much? How could a family let go of a dog who had been there for so long? She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew that Max was sick. She had seen him grow weaker over the past weeks, his once boundless energy fading to nothing. She had noticed how he no longer ran to greet her when she came home from school, how he slept more and more each day, his eyes dull and his tail still. Max was her best friend, and she couldn't imagine life without him. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she gently stroked Max's fur. She leaned in close, her tiny face just inches from his, and whispered in a soft, trembling voice, "Please, Max, don't leave me. I love you so much. Please don't go. I need you." Her words were so simple, yet they held an ocean of emotion, words that only a child could speak, raw and pure. Lily's plea wasn't just an expression of love. It was a desperate wish, a final attempt to stop the inevitable. She didn't understand what it meant to lose a pet forever, and she wasn't ready for the pain that came with it. In her heart, she believed that love was enough to make Max better, that if she could just tell him how much he meant to her, it would somehow fix everything. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson watched their daughter, their hearts breaking anew. There was something about Lily's innocence, her unwavering love for Max, that made the decision even harder. They had lived with the understanding that Max's time was running out, but they hadn't considered how their daughter would handle it. Lily's connection to Max was undeniable. She had always been the one to bring him treats, to curl up next to him on the couch, to brush his coat and talk to him like he was a member of the family. To her, Max wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a confidant, and a friend. Lily's tears fell freely now as she stroked Max's head, her little hands trembling. "Don't leave me, Max. I'll take care of you. I promise I will." Her voice cracked with desperation, the weight of her emotions impossible to hide. Mr. Anderson felt a lump form in his throat. His daughter's words were breaking him apart. He knew what needed to be done, But how could he look her in the eye and say goodbye? How could he explain to her that sometimes, no matter how much we love something, we can't always make it better? Max's eyes fluttered open, just slightly. His gaze met Lily's, and for a brief moment, it was as if he understood her plea. His tail twitched faintly, almost as if he was trying to respond to her. In that quiet moment, with Max's eyes locked on hers, Lily felt something stir within her. She wasn't ready to give up, not without fighting for him. There had to be something more they could do. There had to be another way. Her heart refused to let go of hope. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with the weight of Lily's plea and the looming decision. Max lay quietly on the table, his breath shallow, and the air around the Anderson family seemed thick with uncertainty. Lily's small sobs were the only sounds breaking the stillness, her tiny hands still resting on Max, as if she could will him to heal by sheer force of love. Mr. Anderson, his heart breaking for his daughter, struggled to find the strength to act. He knew that time was running out, and Max's condition wasn't improving. But looking at Lily, seeing the pure hope and desperation in her eyes, he couldn't bring himself to accept that it was truly the end. There had to be something they hadn't thought of, something they could do to save Max, to give him a chance. Unable to bear the thought of losing Max and watching his daughter suffer any longer, Mr. Anderson stood up, wiping the tears from his eyes. He walked over to the desk in the corner of the room, where the phone sat silently, as if waiting for him. He picked it up with trembling hands and dialed the number he had hoped he wouldn't have to call. The veterinary office's phone rang, each tone sounding louder in his ear, as though time itself was slowing down. When the receptionist picked up, her voice was kind but clinical, offering no comfort. "Good afternoon, Anderson Veterinary Clinic. How can I help you?" Mr. Anderson's voice cracked as he spoke. "Hi, this is Mr. Anderson. I'm here with my dog, Max. He's very sick, and we were just told he needs to be put down. But my daughter, she's so upset. We don't know what to do. Is there anything else you can recommend? Anything at all? Please, I just don't want to give up on him." There was a long pause on the other end, and Mr. Anderson could almost hear the receptionist's hesitation. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before she finally spoke. "I'm so sorry to hear about Max. I understand how difficult this must be. There is one option that we could consider. It's an experimental treatment. It's not guaranteed to work, but it could help. It might give Max a bit more time. Would you like to speak to Dr. Reynolds about it?" Mr. Anderson's heart skipped a beat. The idea of trying something experimental had never crossed his mind. He had assumed that all options were exhausted. But now the prospect of hope, no matter how slim, felt like a lifeline. He swallowed hard, a mix of emotions flooding him: fear, desperation, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. "Yes, please. I'll talk to Dr. Reynolds. I can't just let him go without knowing we did everything we could." Moments later, Dr. Reynolds, the clinic's lead veterinarian, came on the line. His voice was calm, yet tinged with the weight of the situation. "Mr. Anderson, I understand your concerns, and I'm truly sorry for what you're going through. The treatment I'm suggesting is new and not without its risks, but it might give Max the chance to recover. I'd be happy to discuss it in detail. Would you like to bring him in for one last evaluation?" Mr. Anderson looked back at Lily, whose tear-streaked face was still fixed on Max. "Yes," he replied, his voice more confident now. "Yes, we'll do it. We'll try anything." With that, hope flickered back into their hearts. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in days, Mr. Anderson felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to save Max after all, and he was going to do everything in his power to make sure they didn't give up on him, or on Lily's unwavering belief that Max could pull through. The next few days felt like a blur. After making the decision to try the experimental treatment, the Anderson family rushed Max back to the clinic for his first round of therapy. Dr. Reynolds explained that the treatment, although experimental, had shown some promise in other cases of terminal illness. It was not a guaranteed solution, but there was hope that it might alleviate some of Max's symptoms and give him a bit more time. The Andersons agreed to proceed, clinging to the belief that anything was better than saying goodbye. As Max underwent the treatment, Lily could hardly contain her anticipation. Every time the door to the clinic opened, she would jump to her feet, looking anxiously for any sign that Max was improving. Her parents, too, tried to stay hopeful, but the reality of Max's condition hung over them like a dark cloud. They knew they were taking a chance, but they also knew they had to try. On the third day of treatments, something remarkable happened. Max, who had barely eaten in weeks, suddenly started showing interest in his food. It was a small thing, but to the Andersons, it was a breakthrough. Lily was the first to notice. She had been sitting quietly by Max's side, stroking his fur as he lay on the floor, when she saw him lift his head slightly, sniffing the air. "Max," Lily whispered, her voice trembling with hope. Slowly, Max's tail began to wag. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Lily's heart leap in her chest. She couldn't believe it. Was he actually improving? She glanced over at her parents, who were sitting nearby, their eyes wide with surprise and disbelief. "Mom, Dad, look," Lily exclaimed, pointing at Max. "He's moving his tail." Mrs. Anderson stood up, her breath catching in her throat. She rushed over to Max's side, kneeling beside him. "Max," she said softly, running her hand along his back. "Are you feeling better, boy?" Max's response was slow, but it was enough to fill their hearts with renewed hope. He slowly got to his feet, his legs wobbling beneath him, but he was standing. It was as if he was gathering all the strength he could muster, fighting against the weakness that had held him captive for so long. He looked up at Lily, and for the first time in days, his eyes seemed to have a spark of life in them. Lily's face lit up with joy, and she threw her arms around Max's neck, her small body trembling with excitement. "You're getting better," she cried, hugging him tightly. "I knew you could do it. I knew you could get better." Mr. and Mrs. Anderson exchanged a glance, their faces filled with astonishment. They had not dared to hope that things would turn around so quickly. It wasn't a full recovery, not by any means, but it was a sign, an undeniable sign that Max was fighting. That evening, Max ate a full meal for the first time in weeks, his appetite returning slowly but surely. He even managed to get up and walk a few steps, his movements still slow, but purposeful. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the Andersons believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for their beloved dog to survive this. Lily stayed by his side the entire night, never once leaving him. She whispered to him, encouraging him, as if her words alone could make him stronger. "You're going to be okay, Max," she said over and over, her voice full of conviction. "You're going to be okay." In that moment, the Anderson family realized that sometimes, even in the darkest of times, hope could find its way back in. Max wasn't out of danger yet, but the first signs of improvement were all they needed to keep fighting, and they would. They wouldn't give up on Max. Not now. Not ever. As the days passed, Max's improvement became undeniable. It was slow at first, small signs that he was slowly returning to himself. But to the Andersons, each little step was a victory. They had prepared themselves for the worst, expecting only temporary relief, but what they were witnessing was nothing short of miraculous. Max was coming back to life, and Lily's faith in him seemed to be the catalyst for his recovery. By the end of the week, Max was walking with more confidence. His movements, though still cautious, were more fluid, and the weakness that had gripped him for so long was starting to fade. He was no longer the sick, exhausted dog that could barely lift his head. Instead, he was beginning to show glimpses of the energetic, playful Max they all knew and loved. One afternoon, Max surprised them all. As Mr. Anderson and Lily were sitting in the backyard, watching the sun begin to set, Max walked over to them, his tail wagging energetically. Without warning, he bounded across the yard and retrieved a tennis ball, his teeth catching it midair with a snap. He trotted back to Lily, dropping the ball at her feet, his eyes shining with excitement. Lily's heart soared. "Max, you're playing again," she exclaimed, her voice filled with sheer joy. She scooped up the ball and threw it again, and Max eagerly chased after it, his legs moving with strength and purpose. It was a sight that brought tears to Mr. Anderson's eyes. He had feared this day would never come, but here it was. Max was running again. Mrs. Anderson joined them in the yard, her eyes wide in disbelief as she watched Max dash across the grass, tail wagging and body strong. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice trembling. "Look at him. He's actually running." Max wasn't just recovering, he was thriving. His appetite continued to improve, and soon he was eating his meals with the same gusto he had once had. The treatment had worked in ways no one had expected. Dr. Reynolds had told the Andersons that Max's progress was rare, but they couldn't help but feel like something more than just medicine was at play here. Perhaps it was Lily's unwavering belief in him, the way she had never once given up hope. Perhaps it was the love that had surrounded Max throughout his illness, the strength of the bond between dog and family. Whatever it was undeniable. One afternoon, as the Andersons sat together in the living room, Max walked over to them, his tail wagging, and sat down at Lily's feet. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, her fingers brushing against his soft fur, and smiled brightly. "I knew you could do it, Max," she whispered, her voice full of pride. "You're strong, just like me." Max looked up at her, his eyes full of affection and gratitude, as though he understood every word. He nuzzled her hand and then lay down beside her, resting his head on her lap. The warmth of his presence filled the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the Anderson family felt at peace. Max's recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. The bond between him and Lily had only grown stronger throughout this journey. They had fought together, and now they were both stronger for it. The Andersons knew that they had been given a precious gift, a second chance to enjoy Max's companionship, and they weren't about to take it for granted. The vet, when he saw Max during a follow-up visit, could hardly believe his eyes. "This is incredible," Dr. Reynolds said, shaking his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it. Max is defying all expectations." As the Andersons looked at their beloved dog, they couldn't help but agree. They had witnessed a miracle, and it was one they would never forget. Max had beaten the odds, and the Anderson family had learned that hope, love, and determination could work miracles. Max's recovery continued to amaze everyone around him. The once frail and lethargic dog was now back to his energetic self, racing through the yard, playing fetch with Lily, and even sneaking into the kitchen to beg for scraps, a far cry from the weak, quiet animal who had been on the brink of death just weeks before. His transformation was nothing short of extraordinary, and the Anderson family couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come. Lily, who had never stopped believing in Max, was his constant companion. She spent every moment she could with him, playing games, sharing snacks, and whispering sweet words of encouragement in his ear. Max, in turn, seemed to thrive in her presence. Their bond was stronger than ever, and it was clear that Lily's love and devotion had been a crucial part of his recovery. Every time Max looked up at her with those grateful eyes, it was as if he was thanking her for never giving up on him. The Andersons knew that Max wasn't just recovering physically. He was healing emotionally as well. There was something about the way he carried himself now that was different. He was more than just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, of the power of love and hope. And the Anderson family understood that their journey with Max had taught them more than just how to care for a pet. It had shown them the true strength of family and the power of never giving up. One evening, as the sun began to set, the Andersons sat together on their back porch, enjoying the cool evening air. Max lay contentedly at their feet, his tail gently wagging as he listened to the sounds of the neighborhood. Lily rested her head on her father's shoulder, her eyes never leaving Max. It was moments like this that reminded them of how precious their time together was and how much they had learned from the experience. "Remember how we almost lost him?" Mrs. Anderson said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "It feels like a lifetime ago." Mr. Anderson nodded, his eyes fixed on Max, who was resting peacefully beside them. "I do. And now it feels like we have him back completely. It's like he's a new dog." Lily, hearing her parents' words, smiled brightly. "I never gave up on him. I knew he would get better," she said with a quiet confidence. It was a simple statement, but it carried so much weight. She had been the one to hold on to hope when it seemed like there was none left, the one who refused to accept that Max was beyond saving. Her faith in him had kept her going, and it had kept Max going too. Max lifted his head at the sound of her voice and gave a soft, contented sigh. It was as if he understood what had been said, and he seemed to rest even more peacefully in the presence of his family. The bond they shared was undeniable, a bond forged through love, perseverance, and mutual trust. As the night fell, the Andersons sat quietly together, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. Max was with them, his recovery a testament to the incredible strength of their bond. The family knew that they had been given a second chance with their beloved dog, and they would cherish every moment they had together. Max had been through so much, but he had come out on the other side, stronger, healthier, and more loved than ever. And the Anderson family had learned an invaluable lesson: never give up, even when the odds seem impossible. With love, hope, and determination, anything was possible. As the months passed, Max's transformation from a sickly dog on the brink of euthanasia to a vibrant, energetic companion was nothing short of remarkable. The Anderson family couldn't believe how far they had come, and with each passing day, they found themselves appreciating Max more than ever. His playful antics, the way he greeted them at the door with an enthusiastic wag of his tail, and the joy he brought into their lives were things they had taken for granted before his illness. Now, every moment with him felt like a gift. Lily, who had been the driving force behind Max's recovery, had grown even closer to him. Her bond with the dog was something that could never be broken, and she often took him for long walks around the neighborhood, her small hand resting gently on his back. Max, with his tail held high and his head held even higher, seemed to walk with a renewed sense of purpose, as though he knew he was cherished and loved beyond measure. He had gone from being a fragile, sick dog to one who exuded strength, loyalty, and joy. The Andersons often reflected on the journey they had gone through, from the heart-wrenching decision to consider euthanasia to the moment when they had seen Max take his first steps toward recovery. It had been a roller coaster of emotions: hope, fear, despair, and then the miracle of seeing Max defy the odds. But through it all, they had learned so much about the power of love and the importance of never giving up. One afternoon, as they sat together in their living room, watching Max lie contentably at their feet, Mr. Anderson spoke quietly. "I don't think we'll ever forget how close we came to losing him," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But I'm so thankful we didn't give up. I don't think we'll ever take him for granted again." Mrs. Anderson nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Max is part of this family," she said, her voice strong despite the emotion behind it. "We'll never forget the lesson he taught us, that love and hope can work miracles." Lily, who had always been the heart of the family's journey with Max, smiled and reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Max is my best friend," she said, her voice filled with love and certainty. "And I'm so glad we didn't say goodbye. I'm so glad we fought for him." Max lifted his head at the sound of Lily's voice and looked up at her with those familiar, loving eyes. His tail wagged slowly, and he gave a contented sigh, as if to say, "Thank you." In that simple gesture, the bond between them was clear, and the love they shared was more powerful than any words could express. The Andersons knew that Max's time with them had been given back as a precious gift, and they would make the most of every moment. They would take him on more walks, play more games, and cherish the simple joys of having him by their side. No longer would they take his presence for granted. Every day with Max was a blessing, a reminder that life was fragile and beautiful, and that love could overcome even the toughest challenges. Max's story had started with despair, with the possibility of an end too soon, but it had ended with a future full of love, laughter, and gratitude. The Andersons had learned that sometimes miracles happen when you least expect them, when you have the courage to believe in hope and fight for the ones you love. Max's recovery was proof of that. It was a story of love, resilience, and the power of never giving up, a story that would stay with the Anderson family for the rest of their lives.